Hi friends! This is a photo that I came across the other day that I find interesting. It has an interesting quality about it that I want to talk about a little bit. And if you look at the bottom half of this photo, you see protesters, the backs of protesters, plenty of protesters. And I found that if I go to a protest to shoot said protest, or if I come across this sort of photo in my feed, generally a photo of the back of a bunch of protesters with their signs is relatively unengaging. However, this photo has a very specific and very major element about it, which is what I want to talk about today, that takes this photo to a very special place. And that, in this case, is, of course, the White House, which is one of the most iconic buildings of modern history and is sort of the center of the infrastructure that is what they are protesting. So it has this emotional punch, engagement to it. And I find this to be an interesting element of photography. It's like the element that is the most interesting thing in the photo takes the lesser interesting bits of the photo that if stood alone, would be and takes them, it elevates them to be as interesting as the most interesting part, if that makes sense. Here's another photo that I think demonstrates that well. If you live in an urban environment, you've probably come across a street performer and specifically a saxophone player. But this, and by the way, I'll link below to all of these photos specifically so you can check them out for yourselves. These are different photographers that I follow, and that last one was particularly from Time, and I failed to look at which photographer that was. Let me go back and look at that really quick. Let's see, Aaron P. Bernstein. So anyway, I'll link to that. But this is a photo of a saxophone player, and I've come across this sort of scene a lot of times, and sometimes it's actually extremely difficult to take an intriguing photo of a saxophone player, just because it's a normal scene. While it's interesting to you, making that and to an actual interesting photo takes a little more work. And what makes this photo come together in such a special way for me is when you have this very dramatic lighting that casts a very dramatic shadow of the saxophone player, and very stark, and you have these little elements, which is the graffiti on the wall, the interesting texture on the wall. You have these lights over on the top right-hand corner, and then you have what I guess is another saxophone player who's hiding in the shadows. And all these little elements come together to do exactly what the last photo did. And I would encourage you and me to look for these things when you're out on the street. Look for the stories to tell and how you can make them have more emotional weight by having elements collaborate together in an intriguing way. This is another photo that, if it did not have the element of the girl walking across the street with her umbrella and her bag, that this would be a bit of a chaotic and unengaging scene. It just wouldn't have the connection that I feel with this photo. Once again, the girl takes the scene that is, in person, very interesting, but photographically a bit scattered and weird and unengaging, and elevates it to be engaging just by her presence. Here's the last photo that I think demonstrates this well. Of all times. It's never been done again, except for my photos. This is a photo of just a street scene. This is almost the reverse of the previous photo. You have the picture of the back of a guy on a bike, which is something that's easy to come across if you do street photography. You're like, oh, that's just the back of a guy. Okay, we'll move on. We'll just delete that one immediately. Won't even take up hard drive space with that one. In this case, the guy in the foreground actually acts as a framing and depth mechanism for everything that's going on in the background, which, in my opinion, is the most interesting part of this scene. This is actually a really unique, interesting street corner, maybe just because I live in America, but I find this to have a very pleasing, orderly chaos aesthetic to it. But also you have these splashes of intriguing elements within it that make the photo come together in a special way, being the facial expressions of the people on the bottom. You also have these unique balancing elements of the characters on the signs on the right and the left, which are these sort of bluish signs, And these little patterns make photos come together and feel less chaotic. But the point here is I would guess that this photo would be a lot less engaging, would not stop you from scrolling as much if the background was a warehouse and a trash can and a homeless guy eating a bagel that he found in that trash can. Pulling off these photos take all sorts of elements coming together: skill, serendipity, time, and practice. But one of the major elements that I really want to focus on is presence of mind. It's sort of this focusing on how to tell the story, being present in the moment when you're out there with your camera. I've been coming to the realization that part of street photography is this act of solving puzzles with all of the elements that are floating around in space before you, figuring out how to make those come together in a way that is engaging. Continuing to sort of open your eyes to what's around you and being present is something that is very important to practice. That's it for this video. I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. Have a lovely day. Goodbye.